A chaotic race from the drop of the green flag, this year's Sailin' 6 Hours of the Glen featured it all. A heavy pop-up shower that wreaked havoc early, some great battles throughout the field, and it all ended with a fuel mileage thriller. This is your Sailin' 6 Hours of the Glen post-race report. Man, the 6 Hours of the Glen has really delivered a great race the past few years, and this year's was no different. We had weather that was a factor early, a bit eerily similar to the pop-up showers that we saw last year. The 6-hour race featured 10 full course yellows, which, yes, is a little bit more than we want to see, but was a reflection of some of the very difficult track conditions and the heavy traffic that we had in this race. But in between all of that chaos, all of that weather that we had to deal with, there were some great battles, and let's start off with the GTP class. With Aston Martin, I feel like I'm starting to sound like a broken record here. They had another impressive race. They ran well all weekend. They were running in the top 5 for a good portion of the second half of the race, and with a little bit of chaos from those race-ending full course yellows, they would ultimately come home in 9th. Like Aston Martin, I feel like the Lamborghini also looked solid here for the first time really since Indy last year. They led a portion of this race, and while they got there based on a strategy call, they were able to hold the lead. It looked like the pace that they had was a real step forward from what they've shown at the Rolex and the 12 Hours of Sebring. They also had a clean race as well, which was great for them, and really just a good weekend to build off of. They've really struggled to start the season, and hopefully they'll be able to roll some of the momentum from this 7th place finish into another solid race later in the season at Indy. BMW, they were never really a big factor at all this weekend, were they? The BOP was affecting them a lot. It really showed throughout the weekend. In qualifying, they were a second and a half off of the pole setting speed that we saw from the Cadillacs. And just generally, they weren't competitive. The 24 would come home in 8th, and the 25 had an issue earlier on in the race. They ended up not finishing. For a team that started off the season so strong, this was definitely a bit of a step back, but they're going to be looking to rebound next race out at Road America. Now, speaking of struggling with the BOP, BMW was not the only one that really struggled with this. Porsche also struggled heavily as well. Overall, it was just a weekend to forget for them. The BOP changes that we saw implemented at Detroit, I feel like really showed through and hit them hard this weekend at the Glen. They just had no straight line speed, which ultimately meant they couldn't really defend against the attacks of other cars, and they weren't able to attack anybody else in their class. We now have a bit of a break before the GTP's return to the grid at Road America, and leading up to that Road America event, I'm sure we're going to see some BOP adjustments that's going to give those Porsches a little bit more straight line speed. Ultimately, they still did manage a solid 4th place finish with all of the chaos that we saw unfold at the end of the race, but the championship leading, at least the championship leading coming into the Glen car, the number 7, ended up with a DNF after a late race accident. Now, where Porsches struggled with the case, the Cadillacs excelled. They were strong all weekend, and at times during the race looked like they could actually be on for a podium sweep. Ultimately, though, the full course yellows in the final hour of this race were really their undoing. The 31 decided to ride out that final stint and wait until the very end for them to pit. They got burned by the final full course yellow. However, on an opposite strategy to that, the number 40 boxed very early in that final hour to make sure that they had the fuel to make it to the end, and that paid off big time for them. They stayed out during the final full course yellow and were able to pick up a 2nd place finish with the 40 of Louis Delatraz and Jordan Taylor, with the sister Wayne Taylor Racing number 10 Cadillac finishing on the podium in 3rd. This marked the first double podium for Wayne Taylor Racing as a 2-car program. And then we have Acura. They were coming off a very strong race in Detroit that saw them pull off their first victory of the season, and they continued to build off of that strong pace here at the Glen. The 93 was in contention for the race lead seemingly all day, and then when the final stint rolled around and they got caught up in some of that fuel mileage, strategy sort of mishap, the number 60 was really able to take advantage of that. The 60 of Tom Blomqvist pulled off a great fuel save in the final stint. They were one of the only cars, if not, they might have been the only car in GTP that didn't have to actually box during the final stint of that race. They were able to hold on and pick up the win here at the Glen to give Acura back-to-back race wins at Detroit and now Watkins Glen. The number 93 Acura was able to still come home in 6th. Now, if you're like me, you probably found yourself at a race weekend with your camera wondering why your shots don't look quite as good as the pros. If this is the case, then check out Paddock Focus photography workshops. You can learn from credentialed photographers like Jamie Price and Drew Gibson. You see Jamie's work right here on the Off in the S's channel all the time. And for Off in the S's viewers, you can get 10% off of any Paddock Focus photography workshop by using the promo code S's. That's promo code S's at paddockfocus.teachable.com. Click the link in the description. Once again, thanks to Paddock Focus for supporting the show. The LMP2 class once again delivered us a mixed bag of pure chaos and great racing. There were a ton of incidents in this class, including a really hard hit early on in the race between two LMP2 cars that brought out a full course yellow. This class also showcased some great racing though, in particular between the 22 United Autosports and 99 AO Racing, the pole sitting number 99 AO Racing entries. They were locked nose to tail for most of the second half of this race, right down to race finish. We saw other cars as well, like the 8 and the 74 factoring in, but really consistently it was the 22 and the 74 here. In the end, it was the 22 United Autosports entry of Paul DiResta, Dan Goldberg, and Rasmus Lind taking the win ahead of the 99 AO Racing and 04 CrowdStrike entries. GTD Pro was also another class that showcased some great racing for us. One of the cars that looked strong all weekend long was the number 9 Pfaff Motorsports Lamborghini. They've been building momentum up until this race. A strong showing at Laguna Seca, first podium of the season at Detroit, and the way that they had kicked off the weekend, showing real speed in practice, carrying that through into qualifying, they looked like they were a serious threat for the race win in this one. Fortunately, a mechanical issue at the midway point of the race took them out and ultimately resulted in a DNF. They will instead look to try and build off of some of the momentum that they had been building and carry that through to their home race in Canada. Ford surprised me in this one. They really emerged with some strong race pace, and alongside some of the strong pace the Corvette showed all weekend, put up a good fight there at the end. Ultimately, though, the BMWs were the ones to beat pretty well all weekend long, especially after the 9 retired earlier in the race. They very likely would have finished first and second, I think, in the GTD Pro class had the number 1 entry not picked up a late race drive-through penalty, but the number 1 would have to settle for finishing 8th. The class was won by the 48 Paul Miller Racing BMW of Dan Harper and Max Hesse. They beat out the number 3 Corvette and the number 65 Ford Mustang. In GTD, the strongest car of the weekend really seemed to be the number 12 Vassar Sullivan Lexus. They were leading late, I mean very, very late, when heartbreak struck for them on the final lap of the race. They ran out of fuel. This unfortunate end handed the win to the 27 Heart of Racing Aston Martin of Zach Robichon, Casper Stevenson, and Tom Gamble. They were also really strong all race, definitely deserving of the strong finish. They were ultimately able to take advantage of Vassar Sullivan's misfortune and translate that into a win for them. The 70 Inception Racing Ferrari and 32 Korthoff Mercedes rounded out the podium. All right, let's take a look at the championship standings now presented by P1 Web Development. If you're a race driver, team, chassis builder, or engine shop who takes racing seriously, but your online presence is an afterthought, you're leaving money on the table. P1 builds sites that gets you noticed, gets you sponsors, and gets your business taken seriously. You can visit the new P1 website by clicking the link in the description. In GTP, we see a change at the top of the standings with the number 6 Porsche Penske Motorsports 963 now leading the way with 2,028 points. That's a 12-point advantage over the sister number 7 Porsche. The 93 Meyershank Racing Acura is 262 points back. The number 24 BMW and number 10 Wayne Taylor Racing Cadillac round out the top 5. In LMP2, it's the number 22 United Autosports entry leading with 1,023 points. That's a 94-point advantage over the number 74 Riley. The number 99 AO Racing, number 04 CrowdStrike, and 43 Inter-Europol entries round out the top 5. In GTD Pro, it's the number 3 Corvette Racing by Pratt Miller Motorsports Corvette that leads the way with 1,632 points. That's a 62-point advantage over the number 77 AO Racing Porsche. The number 44 Paul Miller Racing BMW, 64 Mustang, and 81 Ferrari round out the top 5. And in GTD, it's the number 57 Winward Racing Mercedes, the number 27 Heart of Racing Aston Martin, the 12 Vassar Sullivan Lexus, the 120 Wright Motorsports Porsche, and number 93 Turner Motorsport BMW round out the top 5 there. That wraps up all the coverage this weekend from Watkins Glen. I'll be back with some coverage at CTMP, but in the meantime, you can check out a video on some of the history of today's GTP winning team, Meyershank Racing, right here. Huge shout out to all of the channel supporters. If you too want to support the show, you can head to patreon.com/offintheS's or click that join button below. Once again, thanks for tuning in. I hope everyone has a great race weekend and doesn't go off in the S's.